Good evening, Who Dat Nation, and happy Wednesday to our Bayou Blitz family. I guess we can say happy post-preseason to our Bayou Blitz family. The 53-man rosters throughout the NFL, at least, are initially set. And the next time we will be talking about a football game, it will count for real in the standings. Love you, Will. I am Bob Rose. I am one of your co-hosts to your Bayou Blitz podcast. Joining me is my friend, my partner, my alibi, if necessary, Brendan Boylan. How are you tonight, Brendan?
Doing well. It's kind of crazy to think we're a week and some change away from at least the Saints start of the regular season. I guess we are 8 days away from the start of the NFL season. Yeah. So it took a while, but we're finally here. I'm glad you said that the initial 53-man roster, and like looking at the bottom of the screen, I did the one thing that I hate doing, that's putting final 53-man roster, because it is initial, and there's already been moves for the Saints that are going to change the 53-man roster. So keep that in the back of your mind. And especially guys, whether they're playing for the Saints or whether it's a guy that you really liked in college that didn't make the initial 53-man, does not mean within the next few days they won't end up on the 53-man roster for whatever team it may be. Because there is a lot of under-the-table handshake sorts of things that go on. It's like, hey, you're going to get waived and you're going to get brought back to the practice squad, but we're going to try to shop Billy Joe, and if we can trade Billy Joe, you're going to get elevated, and it's a lot of things like that.
Man, yeah, when you're talking to a more experienced Saints fan, you never ever you said Billy Joe. Yeah, you just that gave me PTSD. Like, it literally tightened up my spine and sent shivers up my spinal cord.
All right, next time I'll say I don't know. I'll just say Bob Rose. We're gonna try to trade Bob Rose so we can sneak you into the roster here.
Hey, you know, the way this offseason has gone, there are some days, and sometimes it's minute by minute, where I wouldn't have minded being traded this offseason, not at all. But that just stays between you, me, and the millions watching around the world right now.
Yeah, so the internet is forever.
Yes,
just in case you forgot. So yeah, no, the initial 53-man roster. Bob, before we dive too deep into it, because this will be something that gets lost in the shuffle, I want to open the show a little bit less traditional and talk about someone who's not on the Saints 53-man roster. And it was the comments from former Saint Lonnie Johnson on Twitter today, or X. And again, I just want to talk about this because it is a talking point. It will get lost on the shuffle, especially with the way Bob and I usually, go back and forth on these hour-long shows. So, Bob, Lonnie Johnson responds to a member of Saints media. The name is escaping me right now.
It's our friend TJ Jones, and I don't mind giving him cred because he does a fantastic job, with his show and his work, and I know he loves what we do too. So yeah, TJ, TJ, you got involved in this, and not necessarily in a bad way, but I don't mind giving you cred.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad way. It was a humorous way, and TJ in the Carolinas as well, or at least one of the last times we were in touch. He was in South Carolina, so Carolina boys covering the Saints. How about that? But he tweets something about or quote retweets or reposts. I don't know what to call things anymore because you're not tweeting because it's X. But
right.
I digress. He shares his thoughts on Lonnie Johnson being released or waived today or yesterday, and says that he would not be surprised if the Saints brought Lonnie back just because of, Lonnie was in New Orleans, played a decent role with the team. The Saints have a lot of questions at safety, and Lonnie very quickly responded and said, essentially, I wouldn't, I would be surprised if it happened. And the banter kind of went back and forth to the point where Lonnie was very honest and just said, essentially, he has no love for the front office in New Orleans. There's some bad beef there, some bad blood there, but has love for the fans. And that happens a lot, right? Where guys, it's kind of the side eye comment to be like, after you get traded or released, like all love to the fans, and that's kind of it. And you're like, oh, that's it. Like no coaches, teammates, just the fans. Okay, but it's very rare that you have a player just come out and straight up say it.
Yeah.
The way that was said was, yes, love for the fans, but I don't mess around with that front office. So instead of focusing so much on just that portion of it, I do want to ask you this, because the Saints front office has seen some shuffling the last few years. And there's been a little bit more criticism towards Mickey Loomis, which you would have thought maybe 10 years ago is impossible, because Mickey Loomis was seen by Saints fans, by NFL media, etc., as a guy who ran a really tight ship, was liked, and you didn't have a lot of people leaving New Orleans on bad terms. That hasn't been the case over the last few years. We've seen more and more people a little more disgruntled when they leave New Orleans, or more vocal about their experience while they were a member of the New Orleans Saints. So, Bob, when things like this come out, are you at all concerned about the current regime having issues bringing in certain free agents? I know that may be silly to ask, considering they have brought in some bigger, splashy, trendy names over the years, but is it concerning to you that this is starting to become more of a trend?
I don't consider it a huge concern, no, because you will have, you can't please everyone all the time, and when someone finds themselves out of a job in whatever field for whatever reason, oftentimes there are some hard feelings. And as you said, we've seen that with Saints players over the years. Akeem Hicks comes to mind. Michael Thomas is the most recent example. Lonnie Johnson, the jersey behind you, the autograph cards behind me, Delvin Breaux. Along with some other players, Brandon Cooks, and a handful of others that I can think of. They've not had kind words to say about the Saints regime, whether it's front office, whether it's player personnel, whether it's medical staff, whether it's coaches. So it doesn't surprise me when a player comes out every so often, and semi-blasts, management. But it can be a concern on some levels, because players talk. Whatever field you're in, if you were a jeweler like I was, jewelers talk. Real estate agents talk. Et cetera, et cetera. So it is bound to affect some player movement, and be sort of a strike against you, like you, Brendan. If you were a very good friend of Lonnie Johnson, and you were all of a sudden a free agent, and your agent or you yourself were contacted by the New Orleans Saints, you'd probably pick up the phone and call Lonnie, because he's a friend of yours and he played for the Saints. And if Lonnie has a lot of bad things to say, that may take the Saints out of your personal consideration altogether, at worst. And at the very least, it would be a major red flag if you go into negotiations or sit down with the team. But do I feel like it's a widespread problem? No, not necessarily, because as I said, you can't please all the people all of the time, and there are a lot of things said about a lot of people in a lot of organizations throughout the league. We don't hear the New Orleans Saints talked about in that negative light nearly as much as we hear other teams. So until that happens, I won't consider it a huge concern.
There you have it. And I don't want to stay on this topic very long at all. But like you said, people talk, players talk. And the more you hear things like that, I guess the more concerned you have to be in the back of your mind.
Yeah, it's something to monitor, to be sure. I don't disagree with that. I wouldn't just sweep it under the rug altogether.
Well, there you have it. Let's talk about the guys that actually made the team and some guys that did not make the team that may have surprised you. So the initial 53-man roster is out along with the practice squad. And we'll get to the practice squad a little bit further down the line. But Bob, when you saw the reports and you guys were tracking it very well, you and John Hendricks specifically, were there any names that really stood out as, wow, I can't believe he ended up making the roster?
Mason Tipton was the undrafted wide receiver from Yale, was the first one that really jumped off the page to me. And it wasn't because of the way Mason played or didn't play. In fact, in my preseason 53-man roster prediction, just before the week leading up to the Arizona Cardinals opener, I had Mason Tipton making the team. He was playing that well through minicamp, through training camp. But 2 days before the Cardinals game, Mason hurt a hamstring, wasn't able to play in any of the 3 preseason games. And that right there, I thought would be the kiss of death. Maybe not that he got cut, but I thought to myself, okay, there's no way he's going to be able to make the team because he hasn't been able to get out and perform in any of the preseason games. So I figured the Saints, and many teams are famous for doing this, especially the Saints, I figured New Orleans would put him on season-ending injured reserve. That basically gives your guy, protects your guy from being picked up by someone else, sort of gives him a red shirt here. So yeah, I was surprised when Mason Tipton made, the initial 53-man roster. But then I got to thinking about it and I was like, as we've talked about here every week, really none of the other receivers were impressive. Equanimous St. Brown had a nice game against Tennessee, still left a couple plays out onto the field and was very up and down throughout the preseason. He was the one I thought would make the team because Tipton was hurt. But like I said, I started thinking, I'm like, by the time they take the field against the Carolina Panthers on September 8th, the Saints do, Tipton would have had over 5 weeks to recover, which is about right for a moderate hamstring pull on a skill position football player. So I was like, okay, so that does make a little bit more sense. As far as names that made it, Jalen Ford was the other one, the rookie 5th-round pick linebacker. Same reason. Jalen was hurt. At least Mason Tipton had an opportunity to turn the coaches' heads, with some mini camp and training camp performances. Jalen really didn't even get to do that because he was hurt for almost the duration. That was another one that teams don't like, as you point out many times, teams don't like to part with draft picks, unless they absolutely have to, because it's basically admitting publicly that you're wrong. That your decision making was wrong, that your scouting was wrong, etc. So again, Jalen Ford was one of those people I figured they'd stash and put on season-ending injured reserve. I still do believe that Ford is going to go on IR at some point with a designation to return. There was some method behind the Saints' madness yesterday with Tipton, Ford, and a couple of these other players, that has the idiots that run social media losing their minds. But there was some method to that madness. But still, those are the 2 names that I did not expect to be on the initial 53-man list.
I think for me, I think Mason is the go-to, the obvious, simply because of what you said. Like, you also had Dennis Allen coming out and throwing some shade, right? And we talked about this with Kendre Miller not being how you can make the team if you're not available, right? So to see that statement, and then you have one or two guys that make the team that were just not available, it's like, okay. But like you said, and like I said all the time, and I can't remember the team. It might have been the Colts. Somebody in the chat can fact check me, but there was one team, I want to say it was the Colts, that cut like 3 of their draft picks. And that doesn't go over well.
Nope.
Even if they're day 3 picks, it does not go over well when you cut your draft picks before even giving them a shot to play. So for me, I don't think there was anything that really stood out as a crazy surprise to the roster outside of the 2 that you mentioned. When it comes to guys that were left off the roster, maybe they came back on the practice squad, but guys that ended up getting cut, Bob, I have one that surprised me. Now, he came back on the practice squad, and we'll talk about the practice squad. And anybody who watches this show weekly, shoot, if you watch this show bi-weekly or monthly, you know Bob's feelings about this player. But I was very surprised that Jonathan Abram was cut. And again, that goes with the fact that the Saints do have a little bit of a problem at safety. Across or beside, I guess. It would be more than across, but beside Tyrann Mathieu. Nobody really stepped up and grabbed the bull by the horns. We talked about that last week. We talked about it the week before that as well. But when you go through the roster, I thought, Abram, say what you will about him in pass coverage, but he had the most NFL experience.
Mm-hmm.
He had been in the system, and seems to be a favorite of some of those guys in the locker room. And Tyrann Mathieu even putting a tweet out when the news came out that he was cut. So that did surprise me a little bit. The Saints brought him back on the practice squad. I think this is a perfect example on why you call it the initial 53-man roster, because he will end up on the roster at some point, right? But I was a little surprised there. Outside of that, I don't think there was anything that was really all that shocking. One's coming to my brain is like a little bit of a shock, but it's slipping. It's been a long day. But no, I don't think there was anything that was like, whoa, how did the Saints cut that guy?
Abram surprised me because of the lack of depth at safety and the fact that the coaches liked him. But I did have him named among 3 or 4 players in an article that I wrote over the weekend as a potential surprise move. So I'll give myself a mini pat on the back because I had him listed, but I didn't expect it to happen. But as soon as it happened, I realized to myself, I'm like, he'll be back within 24 hours. He is precisely one of those veteran players that you talk about, that you mentioned at the opening onset of the show. Being a vested veteran, when you're released in training camp, you do not have to go through the waiver wire process. You immediately become an unrestricted free agent. In other words, you can the minute after you're officially released, you can negotiate with other teams. And typically, when veterans are released in this situation, they usually reach one of those backdoor handshake deals that we're going to release you now. Then after the waiver wire clears, we're going to put so-and-so, Jalen Ford, on injured reserve, saving him, clearing a spot, and bringing you back, or just flat out bringing you back for the practice squad, Jonathan, because as Brendan Boylan on the Bayou Blitz said, we're going to be activating you for games. So it's exactly those kind of deals that take place with vested veterans. The 2 names that people were losing their minds over. One was a surprise to a lot of us because undrafted rookie guard Kyle Hergel. A lot of us felt, and it was reflected in our projections, that he played well enough on a bad offensive line to earn a spot on the initial 53. Excuse me. So it was a little bit surprising to me when Hergel got the release. It was more surprising as the day went along and the Saints basically gutted the depth chart at offensive line. I mean, within an hour, 7 offensive linemen were released. But to all those, ourselves included, Brendan, that we're saying the Saints just don't have the talent at offensive line. Even if you semi believe in the starting 5 or 6, if anything happens to them, you're going to turn to Shane Lemieux, Tremaine Atram, Jesse Davis, Mark Evans. The answer is no, at least based off of their play during training camp in the preseason. And it's quite apparent that the Saints feel the same way because they released all those guys. Now, Hergel, Ezram, I think Lemieux too, were all brought back to the practice squad. That's pretty typical. The Saints will always carry at least 3 offensive linemen on their practice squad. But that, more than an individual player, the fact that they gutted their depth chart at the offensive line, tells me that they are not done making moves here. And then the one that everybody was losing their minds over, the undrafted running back Jacob Kibodi. I say to most of the people that were being critical, if this young man was not from the University of Louisiana, you wouldn't care, and you may not even know who he is. Don't get me wrong. I like Kibodi. I like the way he runs. He had a terrific half against the Tennessee Titans. The rest of the preseason, he looked okay, but he did not outperform Jordan Mims. He did not outperform Jamal Williams. He certainly wasn't going to take Alvin Kamara's spot on the roster. And he didn't, in my opinion, he didn't even outperform James Robinson, who was released as well. So everybody was saying, when it happened, I said, well, I'm not surprised Kibodi didn't make it, but I guarantee you the Saints will look to bring him back on the practice squad. And everybody countering back, oh, he's not going to clear waivers. He's just too good. He's this, he's that. Off of one half. Well, lo and behold, no one picked him up. Jacob Kibodi is on the Saints practice squad. You guys have to take some of these moves in perspective. I think everything has sort of played out exactly the way the Saints have wanted it to so far. I know you impatient people want the Saints to sign a more offensive lineman like yesterday. Well, the Saints aren't the only team that needs offensive linemen. The teams that have good offensive linemen, they aren't real quick to part ways with them. So they're doing their due diligence and going through the linemen that are available, sitting with Clint Kubiak, Rick Dennison, John Denton, the offensive coach of Brain Trust, saying, okay, this guy's still available. Does he fit your system? Do you have any experience working with him in the past? Or do you know people that do? Give them a call, get their feedback. This is going to take some time, but the Saints, I guarantee you, are not done adding offensive linemen.
They're not done adding in general.
Well, no.
And before we get to some of the waiver wire pickups and trades that we saw today, I can't believe I missed this comment. So I'm going to throw it up on the screen. This is from John Butler. He has a new title for Bob Rose.
Uh-oh.
So here we go. Bob Rose, jeweler, coach, writer, podcaster, genius, billionaire, playboy, and philanthropist. There we go, if I can speak. So Bob, I guess I have to add that to every podcast we do, and instead of throwing up your Twitter handle, it's just got to say that.
I love it. I love it all. We might want to add secret playboy, anti-billionaire, volleyball player, sprinter, former sprinter,
athlete.
Former sprinter. Yeah.
Bob has a long list of things.
But I like it. Well, instead of, I'm watching it scroll now. Thank you for tuning into the Bayou Blitz podcast, blah, blah, blah. You can follow the podcast. We could put all of Bob Rose's titles and just scroll it across the whole time.
Forget the thank you for tuning in like that. Like,
you don't want to thank anyone. I'm a philanthropist. I'm a secret playboy.
Words are important to speak in podcasts and get paid for them.
So I've heard.
Words are good. All right.
It's a Minute Media. Note to Minute Media, you might want to be very, very, very careful. The live ads you give to Bob Rose to read on the Bayou Blitz podcast.
Yeah, we might have to leave them for me, and even then, they might not get read correctly. Sidebar: the funniest things were when I did college football. Some of the reads you would get year to year, because some of them you would purposefully be like, can we save this for like the bitter end? Because I know like you mess it up so much throughout the year. You're like, how far can I put this one off throughout the duration of a game? And then you had some that you could just memorize. Like, and there are still some that I could probably pull out of the back of my head and almost recite word for word to where you didn't even need the read to be handed to you. But man, the ones that tripped you up every time, those were the fun ones.
Yeah.
Those were the fun ones. But let's talk about some other moves the Saints made before we get to the practice squad. I don't think that's surprising of a move, simply because Kalen Saunders is going to miss some time with a leg injury. So the Saints do I guess what we'd call a very traditional post 53-man roster move, where you're trading day 3 picks and bringing a guy in, and a guy that still relatively young. I mean, you're not talking about like a chiseled, seasoned NFL veteran, but a young guy who has some upside coming from Washington. Bob, what can we tell the people about the newest member of the New Orleans Saints? And also, sidebar, because the Saints didn't send anyone out in this trade, someone will have to be cut for this deal to be finalized.
Yeah, actually, New Orleans made 2 moves today, and I know we'll get into the second one in a minute. So they're going to have to move 2 players. We have, Brendan and I have our theories on who some of them could be, but again, we'll get into that in a minute. The trade that you're referring to, Washington, I refuse. I'm not allowed to say what they're formerly called, and I refuse to call them what they're currently called. So I just call them Washington whenever possible. And seriously, go read my articles wherever I have to refer to that team. And I very, very, very rarely use the C word. I did once in today's article. Anyway, well, yeah, I'm not proud of myself, but I did. But yeah, Washington traded defensive tackle John Ridgeway to the New Orleans Saints in exchange for Ridgeway and a 7th-round choice draft pick next year. The Saints sent Washington a 2025 6th-round choice. Ridgeway played 2 years with Washington, and he's not much of a pass rusher. In fact, he only has 1 career quarterback pressure, no tackles for loss. He is that prototypical early down goal line situation run stuffer. Just a short, squat, strong, wide body that's just tough to move out of the way. And ideally is going to push blockers into the backfield. Is it a difference maker along the Saints offensive line? No, it probably isn't. And to those special people that only want the Saints to sign or trade for offensive linemen, and why are they making this move? They already have Brian Bresee. Yeah, they do. But Brian Bresee, as good as he is and can be, he's not 2 people, so he can't play both tackle spots at once. And
wow, that's a revelation.
All right. He cannot, last I checked, I don't think he's superhuman either. So he cannot play every snap of every game of every season.
Sure he can. You just take injuries on the slider on Madden, you go off. And then you go fatigue, off.
Been a couple years since I played Madden. I actually forgot that you could do that. But yeah, I mean, Ridgeway, you mentioned Colin Saunders' injury, and he's actually one of the candidates currently on the roster that might be moved in the next 24 to 48 hours to injured reserve with a designation to return. Again, the Saints have to make 2 roster moves, and they don't necessarily have to be cuts. You can move a player off. Jalen Ford, we mentioned. Mason Tipton, we mentioned. Saunders is another candidate. Now that the waiver wire has cleared, you don't have to cut these guys to bring them back or to move them to injured reserve. You could just put them straight there, and they'll only have to miss 5. I think it's still 5 games before you can designate them for return. So even if Saunders doesn't go on IR, it's pretty widely expected he's going to miss at least a few games. That's one of the reasons why Kendall Vickers was kept, and Vickers had a pretty strong preseason anyway, by the way. And it's also a good reason why they made this trade for Ridgeway. Is he going to be an every down player? Absolutely not. Is he even going to be active for all 17 games? Probably not. But he's going to be a situational player that's going to increase the depth of that interior unit, which is going to keep the Brian Bressees fresh late in games, late in the season. And that's exactly what you want. That's why we talked about depth being so important on the ends, so players like Cam Jordan can stay fresh. It's the same. You want the same thing with your Bressee and your Nathan Shepard's in the middle. Ridgeway is a depth piece that's going to be used, hopefully successfully, for situational football.
I think the big thing that people forget, and you said the word there at the very end, which is depth. How important depth is, right? Because everybody in their brains, maybe not everybody, most people in their brains are thinking about the starters, and the starters aren't only, right? Their brain automatically turns off injuries and turns off fatigue. Mm-hmm. And they focus on those 22 guys, the 11 on one side and the 11 on the other, for every team in the league. But it's the teams that are deep at positions that make deep runs. And that's across all sports, right? When you go down the list of some of the greatest teams that ever played, why can we name the random backup defensive end on those teams? Because they made a flipping impact during the season, and it was important, even if it was one game, right? When we talk about teams that didn't even win a Super Bowl, but surprised a lot of people and made a deep run, why can we name their third running back? Right? And you don't even have to be a super fan of the team, but you're like, oh yeah, I definitely remember, Johnny Be Good on X team because he had that one really good game, or he had that one play, remember? And then even more so for my other love in the NBA, like you look at the teams that go win championships, the Boston Celtics this year that won a championship in the NBA. They had the deepest roster in the league.
Yeah.
It's that way for everything.
Well, and you look at, to your point, you look at the Saints, Saints alone. And everybody always realizes, if your quarterback goes down for a few games, you better have a capable backup to keep your head above water. That goes without saying. But to your point, it's the other positions too. You remember back in 2009, Lance Moore actually missed most of that season, with injury. They still had Marcus Colston, but they also had Devery Henderson step up, Robert Meacham step up, and a couple other role-playing receivers. We know that the Saints have always been deep at running back under Sean Payton. When one guy goes down, you have 2 or 3 others that can step up and carry the load. It's precisely those kind of things that. Like you said, the deepest teams are the ones that typically make the deepest runs, because it's literally impossible for all your guys to stay healthy for all 17 weeks, and then the 2 or 3 weeks it's going to take for a postseason run.
Absolutely. I mean, and to your point with running backs, I mean, we could play that game, and we have played that game where it's like, let's name all the running backs the Saints have had in the Sean Payton era. Ivory, Robinson, Ingram, Sproles, Bell, Thomas. Like, you could go through that list, and it's like, well, yes, like we've covered the Saints for a long time, or we've been fans of the team for a long time. But you ask other people, You know, and sometimes it's just because they were damn good at fantasy football, right?
Yeah.
People were like, Pierre Thomas was like a fantasy football like god to get in round whatever. You know, I think of guys like Matt Forte. Like in 20 years, are there going to be a ton of people talking about Matt Forte? No, but he was really good for Chicago for a really long time, right? Guys like that. Anyway, those things matter. What's the old saying, coach philanthropist Bob, insert titles here, is you're only as good as your worst player.
You really are.
Right? And this is a prime example of that. It's not a flashy move. It's not a move where you're going to see a ton of jerseys getting sold tomorrow when it becomes officially official, but it's important. And that's a good segue into the other move that the Saints made today, because on paper, which we love saying here on this podcast, on paper, you kind of look at it and you go, yeah, like, I guess I get it because it's running back depth. But there's a lot of people that also are like, well, but why? Why would they bring in an all-pro return man when we already have Pro Bowl level return man? Well, there's a really good answer for that, and that's Rashid Shaheed's going to be the number 2 receiver. Do you really want him sitting there and returning every kick and every punt? Probably not. And especially with the way the rules are now for kick returns, which is still really silly looking. I'm not going to get used to that for a long, long time because it looks funny. Everything about it is silly. I understand player safety, but just watching it on TV, you're just like, what's going on? Like, why are they not moving? Like, did my TV glitch? You know, like what happened? But I digress, Bob. The other signing for the Saints today, a former member of the Minnesota Vikings.
Yes, running back, kick returner, and I know I'm butchering this name, and I'll do the best I can. Kene Nwangwu.
That's why I let you say it.
I knew it too. So we'll just, until I learn how to pronounce his name correctly, we'll just call him Kene, because I'm fairly certain that's at least the correct pronunciation of his first name. But again, he's been in the league 3 years, so a young guy. First or second team All-Pro in each of his first 2 seasons as a kick returner. And that's why this move was made. He only has 61 or 61, 67, career rushing yards and, like 8 or 10 receptions. I don't remember the exact total. It's in the article that I did. But we're not talking about an offensive threat here. We're probably not talking about the next diamond in the rough, like Kyrie Robinson or Chris Ivory turned out to be, unheralded, to key member of the Saints offense. You never know, but I don't think that's why the Saints made this signing. They made it to bolster special teams. Again, he is a first or second team All-Pro kickoff returner twice. And I understand you have Rashid Shaheed. And not only to your point where this allows Rashid to focus a little bit more on the offensive side without risking him taking additional risks for injuries. But now you could still use Shaheed as a punt returner because that's where he mainly earned his All-Pro last year. But you can also use Shaheed in different situations. Like we really need a big return or a momentum switch now. You could plug Rashid Shaheed in. Remember way back when the Washington Redskins, see, I can say it there, used Darrell Green exactly that way. So I could see that scenario. And what I did notice during the preseason kickoffs is both kickoff returners would typically get involved. Now it's not unusual for teams in recent years to still put two kickoff returners back there, but it was a lot easier to kick away from one of them or both of them. It's going to be harder to do that now, and it's going to be really hard to do to keep the ball out of an explosive player's hands if you have 2 of them back there. So Shaheed and Kene back to return kickoffs, a distinct possibility. And you also have depth there. Jordan Mims returned kicks during the preseason. James Robinson, who, as I mentioned before, was released, he returned kicks. Cedric Wilson returned punts. We think that Mason Tipton was going to be looked at as a potential punt returner before his injury. So again, you have versatility. You have different pieces that can be used there. We all remember how good Deontay Hardy was, as a kickoff and punt returner. We also remember that the Saints had no answer for that when Deontay got hurt until they got Shaheed. And that's actually how Shaheed got his shot in the league, was when Deontay Hardy got hurt. So don't forget that either. You never know what could happen. So this move, it cost the Saints nothing. At the very least, it adds competition to the kick returner room. That's at the very least. At the very most, you found another guy who can flip the field for you, flip field position, and perhaps be a momentum changer in games.
Simple as that. It goes back to what we were just talking about with depth, right? Now, this one's a little bit more exciting than a defensive tackle, because this guy, to Bob's point, could get an opportunity, and we could talk about just a crazy game that he had 20 years from now, right? He's a guy like that. Anytime that you have a guy who's been a all-pro selection, particularly as a return man, there's that possibility. Now, I'm not going to go as far to say he's one of those guys that, you really got to flip the TV on every time that there's a punter or whatever, because we don't know that.
No, I mean he returned 3 kicks for touchdowns in his first 3 years, though. And whoever heard? We mentioned Deontay, we mentioned Rashid. Nobody ever heard of these guys before they burst onto the scene, and even prior to that, who ever heard of? I mean, our friend Tyrone Hughes is a Hall of Fame kick returner. People heard of him. He was a draft choice. Who heard of Mel Gray? Who heard of Courtney Roby? Who heard of Michael Lewis? And we are, as us elderly Saints fans can remember, we all remember what a factor, what the it factor was that all of those returners brought to the New Orleans Saints.
See, for me, when I think electrifying return men for the Saints, my mind immediately goes Reggie Bush.
Mm-hmm.
But that was mostly just because Reggie was one of those guys, one of the very rare few guys where it was like anytime he touched the ball, you had no idea. Throughout his career, even after New Orleans, you just didn't know. But return men are extremely undervalued. There's only one kick returner in the Hall of Fame, right? With just truly kick returner, and that was Hester, who just got in.
Yeah.
He changed that. The way that we view return men completely changed because of Devin Hester. And for some of you Madden and video game lovers, I can't remember which Madden it was, but there was one Madden that Devin Hester was just stupid.
Yeah.
Like, I think I returned in franchise mode like 50 touchdowns with Devin Hester, like a single season in franchise mode, because it was like anytime you punted to him, like you made one cut, you were gone. But that's just the way. Josh Cribbs, that's another good one.
Yeah.
Underrated return man. But those are those moves for the New Orleans Saints. We'll talk about the practice squad a little bit. And for any of you sitting at home going, why are they talking about the practice squad? Because these guys matter too. Like, we've had multiple examples over the years where guys get called up from the practice squad and actually either find themselves a permanent role with the team or in the league, or they end up being a key contributor to the team that makes a playoff run, or at least knocks on the door of the playoffs, or are classic and favorite cases of guys that are cut, re-signed, cut, brought to the practice squad, elevated, cut, signed back to the practice squad. Some of our favorite guys like that.
Well, Keith Kirkwood got cut by Baltimore yesterday. Speaking of,
don't remind me, okay? He's gonna make a practice squad somewhere. In all honesty, with the Saints, like, I could totally see about halfway through the season going, what's Keith up to? Like, What's he doing over there? I was thinking JT Barrett still holds the NFL record for that. So New Orleans Saints legend, JT Barrett. Oh, what was the receiver? What was the receiver's name? Andy Tanner.
Yeah.
Got cut. Like, that was a guy every year you're rooting for to like make the team. And it was like every year Andy Tanner just ended up on the practice squad. You're like, we're still holding out hope. We're still holding out hope for Andy. So anyway, practice squad guys. Nothing's too surprising.
No.
For the most part. We already mentioned some of the names, but Bob, I know you have it right in front of you. The entire, yep. Yeah, and I laugh every time because all of my notes are electronic, right? Like I'm here on my laptop, I can flip tabs or whatever, and here's Bob just like going, just scrolling through his book of notes. So Bob, the practice squad.
Practice squad, and this is no particular order. No,
it is. It totally is, guys.
It actually isn't. Well, it's in order of how I learned.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you know what? I'll try to list it to you by position. Linebacker, because this was one. This was one we knew some talented players were going to have to be released by the Saints. We were hoping that a few of them would clear waivers and come back. So linebacker, they got back Isaiah Stallberg, and Kalike Hudson. So I was, Kalike was one that I had on my 53-man projection. So I was happy to see him back. Safety, you mentioned Jonathan Abram, Hugo Amadi, Millard Bradford. So they went a little bit heavy at safety here. Wide receiver, Equinemius St. Brown. No surprise there. Kevin Austin Jr., that one was a little bit surprising to me. So if you're looking for a spot for Keith Kirkwood to come back on the active roster, pretty sure I would take Keith before Kevin. But yeah, St. Brown and Kevin Austin are the wide receivers brought back. Offensive lineman, Shane Lemieux, Kyle Hergel, Josiah Esram, and that's it for our offensive lineman. Kicker, the Irish kicker, Charlie Smythe brought back. The Saints are going to use an international player exemption on him, so that way he won't be able to be poached off of the practice squad, and they'll be able to add another player on. We expect that to happen tomorrow. Where was a kicker, offensive line, tight end? They got two, Michael Jacobson and Trayton Welch. I apologize, I do not know much about him, but he was a release from another team. Cornerback, Shamarja Jean Charles, who a lot of people felt would make the 53-man roster. I didn't have him over Rico Payton, but I'm glad they brought him back. Running back, Jacob Cabote was brought back. Defensive end, Nico Lalos. And I think that has us all caught up. Guys, please feel free to yell out something if I missed anybody, but I think that's your New Orleans Saints practice squad. There's still one more spot that needs to be filled once the kicker is given the international player exemption.
It's going to be Keith Kirkwood. Like, we're just speaking it into existence at this point, even though he's not going to be able to get his number back. You know what? I do want to bring this up because it was very short-lived and we didn't get a chance to talk about it. My weird stats, and you guys may remember the weird stat that I had on Taysom Hill like 2 years ago, right? Here's my other weird stat for you guys. And I don't know if this one necessarily counts because it was the preseason. Has there ever been a franchise that had a single player wear 3 different numbers for a team? Because if you count Marquez Callaway, the Saints have had 2. And that's one that's just, it's out there. Like, there's no way to research that. There's no way to really know. But Mark Ingram wore 22, 28, and 14. Callaway wore 1, 12, and then whatever he wore.
Right.
Like, I don't know. It was a one-day reunion.
I was going to say, I'm not sure Marquez was in town long enough to get a uniform this past time. But if you recall, and you and I both have the rookie card, I don't know if he ever wore the jersey for preseason, though. Mark
32.
Mark Ingram's rookie card was 32. I do not. We need Alan Ulrich to answer this one. I don't know if Ingram ever actually wore the number 32 in a preseason game, though.
I don't know. So if he did, and you count that, that's 4, 32, 28, 22, 14. I think he ended up switching from 32 to 28 because he took 28 initially, right? And that was because he flipped his dad's number.
Yeah.
And then he took 22 because that's what he wore at Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
And then 14 is when he came back because who had 22? I don't know. 22.
It was Chauncey that had 22 at the time.
And then he took 40. He took 41. He flipped it.
Yeah.
14 for Alvin Kamara. Okay, so there you go. He really liked flipping numbers. Mark Ingram, apparently. But anyway, random sidebar when it came to that, when it came to the Keith Kirkwood connection. But I was actually excited to see Smythe come back. I know that really wasn't a surprise to anybody. But he had a really good camp, and the Saints have been notorious for working out multiple kickers in the offseason. So much so that we've seen some guys make the team that we didn't expect, i.e. Will Lutz, however many years ago that's been now. And I'm not saying that, anybody should be looking over their shoulder, but it's always good to have competition. Bob might be saying somebody should be looking over his shoulder, but it's always good to have competition. And you guys know more than any position that is scrutinized for screwing up one time, it's kicker. It is absolutely kicker. But the Saints do have a new face in the special teams room, a new punter. I don't think that should come to me, that doesn't come as a surprise to me, and I don't think it really comes as a surprise to anybody because Headley was a major letdown. Because in my opinion, when Gillikin took the job over from Thomas Morstead, like Morstead goes out of his way to say like Gillikin's going to be better than me. Like he's going to be a fantastic punter for a really long time. And then Gillikin has like a bad end of the year, not a great camp. And then Headley ends up getting the job. And then we see him in game and we're like, what? Like, no offense. Like, I liked the fact, older rookie, comes from overseas. I loved the story, but it was never really there.
No.
So I'll ask you this, Bob, and I guess we'll transition into dot or drop as we're running out of time. So dot or drop, Smythe will be on the 53-man at some point this year.
Drop. And it's not that he's not capable. I don't think Smythe would be on the practice squad if it weren't for the international player rule.
That's fair.
And again, it's not because of his abilities. I think I never really felt like that this was a true kicking competition. And the reason that I didn't is because every time, and it happened three times, I think, but 2 at least. But every time the Saints had a 50-plus yard field goal opportunity this preseason, they trotted Groupie out to try it. And I scratched my head at the time, and I'm like, if I'm Dennis Allen, I said this several times, I think, if I'm Dennis Allen, I already know what I have in Blake Groupie because I've had him for a year. I want to see what the new kid can do in a game environment in this kind of situation, and we never really get to see it. So it was for that reason and that reason alone why I never felt like this was a true kicking competition. But Smythe was just brought in to push Groupie. I wouldn't, if Charlie gets his chance, I've liked what little I've seen so far, and I definitely root for him. But yeah, barring injury, and which, knock on wood, rarely happens to kickers, drop. You will not see Charlie Smythe on the 53-man roster this year.
That's fair.
My daughter drop. Man, it's not like we don't do daughter drop every single week, but I don't feel prepared. You know what? Daughter drop. When to know Passanio is starting the year on the physically unable to perform list, the PUP list. He will be eligible to return after missing at least 6 weeks. My daughter drop to you is daughter drop when Tano Passanio returns. Isaiah Foskey's out of a job.
Ooh. I'm going to drop because
Peyton Turner will be hurt by then, so it'll be a swap.
Hey now. I still have faith. I might be the only one still riding the faith bus for Peyton Turner.
Hey, listen, if Peyton is on the field, I like him as a player, but the problem is keeping him on the field.
Yeah, if he can ever stay healthy, I'm not talking like crazy. I don't think he's going to be like a Pro Bowl or anything, but I think he'll be a very solid contributor for a team, whether it's New Orleans or past that, right? For Foskey, it goes back to what we were saying earlier. And it's not just football. People do not like to admit that they're wrong. And because you spent a second round pick on him, I think you're going to let that ride as long as you can. I.e., different reasons, but Peyton Turner. A lot of other people would have said, well, just cut him. Like, he can't stay healthy. Just cut him. Can't make the roster from the medical room. Allows 3 guys to make the roster from the medical tent. But whatever. So yeah, I think he's still gonna be around. I think Passanio, I think him not being there the first 6 weeks is going to be more noticeable than most people are going to anticipate.
Yeah.
I know you've been a Passanio guy for years now. But his tape really stands out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily the box score. It is the tape for Passanio that stands out. He's definitely one of those glue guys for a team, and particularly for a rotation that, when he first came to New Orleans, we didn't really know how he was going to fit into that defensive line rotation. And he has not just carved out a role for himself, but he has almost like invented a role for himself in that rotation. And he's done a very good job of it. All right. Daughter drop. This is looking way far out. It's a prediction for the season. All right. Daughter drop. Willie Gay Jr. plays himself out of New Orleans.
And you mean that in a good way, I assume.
He plays so well. The Saints could not retain him.
Dot.
He had
and I hope I'm wrong, but I think Willie Gay Jr. is going to play that good that he is going to set himself up for some big money. I said it after I think it was the first preseason game. I said that I'm quoting myself here. I said that I've seen enough. If I'm Mickey Loomis, if I'm Gail Benson, hell, if I'm Dennis Allen, I've seen enough. I want to sit at the negotiating table with his reps now and iron out some kind of 2 or 3 year contract extension. I love the fit for Willie Gay. I predicted it pre-free agency. I was elated when it happened in free agency and continue to be excited from what I've seen through training camp and the little reps he got in the preseason. Obviously, he's not Demario Davis, Willie Gay isn't, but I think he could have a Demario Davis type of impact on this defense. So yes, I think Willie Gay is going to play that well that he could potentially just price himself right out of the Saints market. My daughter dropped to you. Also sort of a season projection, and it's a sore spot with a lot of Saints fans right now. Kendre Miller.
Fun.
Will start the season on IR. Not a surprise to any of us. The Saints used one of their 2 injured reserve exemptions, where again they could place him on injured reserve, designate him for return. Teams could do that with up to 2 players this year, prior to the training camp cuts. Obviously, they did it with Miller. So again, Miller has to miss. I'm pretty sure it's a minimum of 5 weeks. My daughter drop to you is. Dot or drop, we will see Kendre Miller active for over 6 games in the 2024 season.
Active is the scary word there, because I personally think that DA had a little bit of a mean streak this preseason, right? Could I see DA going like petty Sean Payton? Like maybe a little bit. I could see the pettiness be healthy scratches once he comes off of IR.
Maybe.
So that's why I'm a little hesitant, but I am going to drop it. I do think he plays more than 6. Is it close? Yes. But I do think he plays more than 6, or at least he's active for more than 6. That's a weird situation. And I think it's even more weird because we really haven't heard from Kendre. And a lot of times when you have a coach kind of come at you like that, there is some media availability, but there hasn't been really any media availability with Kendre, which might be a good thing. I don't know. I remember being a 22-year-old person and not like being called out. So maybe it is good that there hasn't been any media availability.
Especially when you're essentially called a wuss out in public by your coach.
Yeah, so maybe that's a good thing. But no, I do think he'll play a little bit. And I still have high hopes too. I mean, it's a guy that when he was selected, we both agreed fit the system better than experts thought. And they're not going to ask him to be the Alvin Kamara replacement. They're going to ask him to be the Alvin Kamara complement, right? And I do think he can complement him and Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams very well. Yeah. So we'll see. Well, guys, that's this week. Like the next show we do is going to be a week 1 preview, and that's really exciting. Extremely exciting. Bob, until then, I have a prediction. You're going to have a few more articles regarding personnel moves. When I say a few, let's create our own Bayou Blitz betting line.
Right? Over under, nice.
Over under 4.5. Articles written, not player or personnel moves. Articles written in regards to personnel moves, because you could easily bunch 2 together, right? And just do a recap of the day. So over under 4.5. Chat, how you guys feeling? Bob, how are you feeling?
Yeah. 4.5 is a high number. I'm assuming you mean until we meet again.
Yes.
So that's over 1 week, 7 days, 4.5.
5. It's going to be 5 or less than 5.
Basically,
when you break it down. So yeah.
Do you count a historical article regarding upcoming player personnel moves?
No.
Then I'll go under. By the way, I have a teaser. I have a teaser for tomorrow. I would go put. Yeah, if the number was 4 or 5, I would probably go. Bet a push. So John Butler, you can also add gambling addict onto there too.
That is so much disrespect to our late friend for you to say gambling addict, because I promise you, sir, you are nowhere close.
I've been to Vegas twice. I've been to Atlantic City. I think 10 or 12 times, maybe more. So I've been in the rooms a lot. I know my personality. I am an addictive personality by trade, or by nature, excuse me. Those of you that know me personally or have listened to my personal story, you know that that I'm a recovering addict. When it comes to alcohol and certain chemicals as well. I recognize my potentially large issue with gambling, and I also recognize the fact that I have Al Bundy, George Costanza type of luck. So, other than one occasion, I was always pretty intelligent when I went into a casino and only carried a certain amount of money on me, with no ATM card whatsoever, because I'm an addict by trade, an alcoholic, and then I was drinking really heavily, and maybe the most competitive person you've ever met. So you put me at a card table, roulette, any of that stuff, and you basically say I lost. I'm going to want to play until I feel like I won, or I feel like I beat you, or I feel like I beat the system. You get alcohol in me, and that red lines to an extreme. So I'm fairly proud of myself that we'll call it me being in a casino 15, 20 times in my life, that I was always able to recognize my shortcomings, my many shortcomings as a human being, and I only carried a small amount of cash on me.
Well, that's good. That's good. And we're not encouraging Bob to get back to the casino anytime. You don't live that far from Hollywood, though, do you? Right?
From Hollywood, yeah, but there's a casino in Wheeling that's like an hour and a half drive from me. Yeah.
Oh, dang.
A big casino too.
Wheeling. Oh no, have I been there?
I
probably have. Honestly, I probably have. I think right.
When you and Art were here before, you were at the Rivers.
Yes.
Wheeling, and there's a smaller casino in Weirton. Wheeling and Weirton was where everyone would go before the Rivers Casino. Now that the Rivers has opened up, the business is sort of split. So I'm not sure you went to Wheeling, but I know you went to the Rivers.
I might have been, honestly, knowing Art, I probably went to both. But okay, so I'm gonna go over the line, circling all the way back. 4.5. I'm gonna go over. I do think that the Saints make more moves than anticipated, and some of that's going to revolve around that offensive line as guys kind of become available. So between now and next Wednesday, I do think there's going to be a handful of new names, or maybe even familiar faces that just come back to New Orleans, whether that be on the 53, the practice squad, what have you. So until then, Bob, where can everybody follow you and those articles that you got coming out?
Yeah, and you can, however many player personnel movements the Saints have, John Hendricks and I will be on it as quickly as possible and as thoroughly as possible. And you can follow my work in doing so. Bob Rose over on Facebook, at BobbyR2613 on X, Twitter X, whatever you want to call it.
X Twitter.
I like X Twitter. And we also have our Bayou Blitz previewed on both X Twitter and Facebook. So check out the Bayou Blitz page over on Facebook and do the same over on our Twitter handle as well, at Bayou Blitz Pod or something like that.
There you go.
Do I got it right? Awesome.
Perfect.
Well, then, with that, I'm going out on a high note then.
Yeah, you're done. You can just log out. For myself, you can follow me virtually everywhere at BT Boylan. It's an exciting time. Football's around the corner. Wedding for me is around the corner. It's about to get crazy with everything going on. In the meantime, until next Wednesday, I hope you guys enjoy some college football, whoever you guys are fans of, or wherever your alma mater may be. Go Running Bulldogs. They take on the Wofford Terriers tomorrow in Boiling Springs. So hopefully my alma mater, the back-to-back defending Big South OVC conference champions, can make it a three-peat. That's a mouthful. Bob and I talk about this a lot, but like this whole realigning of conferences is ridiculous. Like, why is the Ohio Valley Conference and the Big South like combining into one conference? I know you're going to go ahead and say your classic thing is like, why is someone on the West Coast of the Big Ten or whatever, right? I know you were going exactly there, but very similarly, Ohio, like the central part, like central to Midwestern part of the U.S. is now a part of the Big South.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, whatever. But you guys enjoy your college football this week. Until next Wednesday, hope you guys find peace, spread love, practice positivity. And Bob and I will be back for another episode of the Bayou Blitz podcast. We'll see you then.